Hello and welcome. Good morning, good day, good evening, wherever in the world you are joining us from today. I am so thrilled that you are here. My name is Will. Let us know where you are tuning in from, and then three words that would describe you. We will be making use of these three words in a little bit. So even if you aren't to come up with ones that fit right at this moment, we have a little bit more time to workshop those. I'll go ahead and get us started. I want to make sure that we're able to maximize the time we have today. So, to set the roadmap for what we're going to do, I have an exercise that we're going to start. We already started to precede it with the three words that describe you. We'll do a little bit more with that. But with that exercise, that is going to be a running theme that we're going to continue to unpack today because my goal is to really help all of you better understand the holistic review process that we use here at Stanford GSB. There's a lot of kind of myth and rumor, and it can often feel like the evaluation process and the admissions process is a black box, but it doesn't have to be that way. So my goal today is to help you understand more about that process so that today can be the foundation for application week. Each of our events this week are geared towards helping you understand with a bit more detail both the parts of the application as well as tips, strategies, frameworks that you can use and apply to really help put your best foot forward in this process. Maybe you're not thinking about Stanford ultimately. Maybe business school doesn't end up being for you. My hope is that also through some of the exercises that we're able to do together, these are things not just dependent on outcome, but you're also going to find value in that process. And these are ways to really think about what is it that you really want to do? What's that next step you're going to take in your life? And how might we be able to assemble the tools, skill sets, learnings that'll help you get there, whether it's business school, hopefully it's the GSB, but anywhere in your life that those come from, how can we get from point A to point B in a way that's right for you? So, coming back to today's events, a holistic review primer, just to get a sense of what is it? What is it not? Because oftentimes it's that what is it not space where we can be the cleanest and clearest and really help kind of illuminate the process. From there, we'll go ahead and talk about what it is we do look for and where we find it. And then what does that mean for you? And I think that's where we really get into the spirit of this week's events. How can you think about the application pieces and the application process in a way that you can understand, hey, maybe these are the details I should be sharing about myself. Oh, I didn't know reflection kind of in this realm was okay. Or, I just have a question about, transcripts or testing. We have events for that as well. But the more questions that we're able to initiate, the more answers and the greater clarity we're going to be able to provide. We'll have about 50 minutes together on today's live session. For those of you who might be watching this on replay, I'll give cues for, let's go ahead and pause here and then give yourself some time to go through this exercise and then jump back on in to continue to see how we unpack, process, and connect the dots between the different things we're doing and the MBA GSB application process. All right, let's get going. So as a preface, there is a ton of information out there. And I think even that is an understatement. There's a lot of advice. Some of it is great advice. Some of it, otherwise. But take anything you hear with a grain of salt, including the things that I'm going to be sharing with you today and that our staff will be sharing with you over the course of the week. We can speak truth about the application process and how we interpret and evaluate. And that's our goal this week, to really lift that curtain. In terms of what you should do as an individual, however, part of the beauty of this process is there is no right way or wrong way. It's really how are we able to give you the power to understand what is it that you want? How are we going to get there? What are the elements of your journey and your story that you are going to let shine and sing through this process? We want to give you the power, and that looks different for each and every one of you. Part of this is understanding who you are, how you show up in spaces, and as you think even beyond the MBA experience, what does that mean for how you navigate through life? This is just one step on an ongoing journey of your life. So take anything with a grain of salt. This is no rule book, but rather maybe a orientation guide to some different things to help you understand or kickstart that process if you ever get stuck. So hopefully take that, come in, fresh eyes, willingness to try new things, and then we'll go down some really interesting paths. All right. So it all starts with you. And this is not an understatement. This is going to be the theme that comes up throughout the week. So we are actually going to start application week by talking about you. So grab a piece of paper. Maybe you're just jotting things down on your tablet. Maybe you're opening up a window. But I'm going to give you a little bit of time. So let's start off. Make a short list about yourself. I say 10 things here, but definitely feel free to do more. Here are some examples of things you might be writing about. Let's start with those 3 words. Sometimes being able to crystallize and distill those elements of who you are and the things that resonate for you can be a great starting point to unpack and learn more about yourself, which is what the MBA is all about as well. Yes, it's about building some of those core business fundamentals, the skill sets that you're going to need to be able to lead a group or organization in any setting. And at Stanford, there's that extra piece, right? That leadership development, that investment in you to help you understand, why should someone follow you? To start that conversation, you need to begin, at least hopefully, with at least some semblance or understanding of who you are. So let's go ahead and start that process together. What are some things you do for fun? What are things that excite you? Maybe when you pick up a book, these are the types of things that keep you turning those pages. When you see a show on TV, or maybe you're watching a movie, you're like, oh, let me go learn more about that. And then you go up, you do a little bit of internet searching to learn more. What are those things? Maybe it's a topic you can talk about at length with your friends. So anything and everything is fair game here. I'll give you a little bit more time to write through. So if you aren't able to make it through all 10, no worries. As long as you get a couple of these bullet points going for our extended use of this list, you're headed on the right spot. So as example, I did this along with you. So here's my cheat sheet post-it with some of the things about myself. So my 3 words are enthusiastic, supportive, and bald. So these might be a little obvious, but sometimes it's those obvious things that really impact the way that you move through space. So don't feel like everything has to be a deep kind of revelation about yourself. If it is, great. But sometimes it's those immediate elements of who you are that can often lead to some of the most interesting insights about who you are. I garden for fun. I find it really relaxing and I love nature. A skill that I've worked on, which is, I guess, kind of perfect for the work I do, is reading applications and really trying to understand who you are as applicants and really honor the effort and all of the detail that you're investing into this process. I care a lot about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, both as you think about it in the US setting, but also internationally. How do we celebrate diversity within and among diversity? How do we bring those perspectives together so that we can learn from each other? And how can we create spaces where people feel comfortable letting people know they're different? Sometimes that can be the hardest thing. And if we're able to create these inclusive spaces, when we feel comfortable and safe and able to voice these, those are the moments that can lead to some of the greatest growth and support and relationship building with those around you. And so that is really important to me. And I can talk about fish. This might seem a little facetious, but what I want you to do next is continue adding things throughout. And we are actually going to start talking about the holistic review process. More to come on that list, so keep adding to it. But what is it? This is going to be the heart of the conversation throughout this week. And it's important to understand our process and the review process specifically so that you can understand the utility and purpose of each of the sections. Once you're better able to understand that and how we use them, that will hopefully help you understand, okay, what types of information can I be sharing? How should I share it? And given the whole range of things I could be talking about, how can I distill them into, those word counts, those limits, or as I think about it, the frameworks and canvases that are provided for you to paint and kind of color within. So definition of holistic as a philosophy. And I'm going to go ahead and read this because I think this is a really beautiful encapsulation of our philosophy for reading applications as well and the evaluation process here at the GSB. So, holistic philosophy, characterized by comprehension of the parts of something as intimately interconnected and explicable only by reference to the whole. So, elements depend on each other for us to understand the greater picture of who you are. And one thing adds extra dimension and visibility into, who you are, what you do, how do you show up in spaces. Definition, doing credit here to where it's coming from, Oxford Languages, thank you. But what does this mean for you? In our evaluation process, what I want you to take a look at are some of the key takeaways. As we're reading applications, that wholeness is really important. So we do not use formulas, we don't use equations, there's not an algorithm that we use to make admissions decisions at the GSB. This might be very different from admissions processes elsewhere, and especially international settings where sometimes that test is really a precursor or the determinant of what happens or where you go next. That's not so at the GSB. So what we're looking at is so much bigger than that. We're going to be unpacking that throughout today. There are no benchmarks, no cutoffs, or quotas as part of the evaluation process. So oftentimes I hear, well, how many people do you take from my industry? Or I hear, you only take 2 people from my country every year, and they come from X and Y industries, 1 from each. And that is actually the furthest from what our process does. We are taking a look at you as an individual where, no one part of the application matters more than the other, because each adds to that whole holistic view of who you are, where context really does matter. So maybe it is elements of your industry that help determine, how might some of those leadership or accomplishments that you do in your everyday work, how do those show up? That looks different in a consulting setting than it might in an entrepreneurial setting. But just because they show up differently doesn't mean one is necessarily more or less important or valuable or impactful than the other. It's just the context that changes. That can also be said for those of you who might be applying early, right? So maybe you are currently in college or an early career professional. We understand that, and that is built into the application process. We don't expect you to have had team leadership roles necessarily. We don't expect you to have anything that someone who's been working 10, 11, 12 years might have under their resume or under their belt. You have different worlds. We are looking at you within yours. For those of you who might be on that more experienced side of the spectrum, it's not just what you did, but what did you do given that time? How did you maximize the resources and opportunities that were provided for you? Right? Who are you because of that? And what are some of those footprints you left behind? Right? Those footprints, again, are going to look different depending on where you are, what you did, and even what you might hope to do next. Those are the key takeaways I want you to take from here. We are really looking through our entire application to get the best sense of who you are, who you might show up in our classroom, who you might show up as in our classrooms and in our community. So what do we look for? This is where we're gonna, again, come back to you. I think you are going to be the best illustration for the message that we're trying to get across today. So go ahead and bring back that list. And to give a little preview of what I want you to do next, we are going to talk about 3 things: intellectual vitality, demonstrated leadership potential, and personal qualities and contributions. These are both a mouthful and can be a lot to write down. So go feel free to use some acronyms here. Stanford and Stanford as a whole is a very acronym-friendly place. So if I refer to these as IV, DLP, and PQ or PQ&C, these are the things that I'm going to be referring to. Please feel free to use these, the shorthand as part of this exercise. if you are writing on a Word document or some other space where, you might be a little bit more limited in the ways you are using kind of text boxes or whatever, go ahead and you are just going to put IV next to the thing that strikes you as, encapsulating what intellectual vitality looks like for you. So for me, that I can talk about fish piece, I actually have a degree in marine biology. There is something about nature and ecosystems and the way species interact with each other that really speaks to me and just fascinates me. And I really love fish for multiple reasons that we're not going to get into today, except to say that both at a scientific, intellectual level, as well as elements of family and memories and personal growth and history, these are all things that, make sense to me. And so for you, as I talk about the descriptions for each one of those categories, feel free to draw that line to make that connection, or add that IV DLP like notation next to it in whatever format works best for you in the here and now. Okay. So for those of you who are going to be watching this later on, I'm going to give a description. Feel free to pause after each description to give yourself time to draw some of these lines and connections. So let's get started. Again, you can use as many bullet points as many times as you want. No limits here. This is all about you. Okay, so I'm going to clear my stuff. We don't need that cluttering the space. Let's focus on our criteria. So if you haven't done so already, I highly recommend that you go to our evaluation criteria section of the GSB MBA admissions website. There's some really great language here on all three of these topics. For intellectual vitality, there are some rhetorical questions to help you think about what are some of the different ways this comes to life for me. In terms of demonstrated leadership potential, there are actually examples of what are some of the types of leadership competencies that you might be exhibiting in your life as well. So definitely jump on that website, bookmark it. I find it incredibly useful, both for this process, but also to think about, hey, how do I get things done? What are things that are important to me? How does this show up in my life? So intellectual vitality. I like to think of this as, what is your relationship with knowledge? It's so much more than a test score or a GPA, right? Those are indicators of how you performed on a test or how you did in a classroom. But you are so much more than that. What are the things that make your eyes light up when you hear a topic? What are the things that you can talk about at length? And thinking about the type of place business school is, thinking about the collaborative environment at the GSB, and how you're learning as much from your classmates, professors, speakers, as much as they are from you. How do you also share that knowledge with others? Everybody takes a different approach, and that's cool. There is something about different ways of learning and understanding that when they come together, they can help push you out of kind of where you might have been before to really take a look at issues and problems from new perspectives. And that's how we're going to define and identify the solutions of the future. So how are you going to bring that mindset, that learning growth element to the table? Where are the spaces that your mind sings? Demonstrated leadership potential, DLP. Think about this as two parts: demonstrated leadership and leadership potential. So both go hand in hand, but are slightly nuanced. So demonstrated leadership can be thought about as, what are the things you have done, right? And context matters here. For those of you who might be applying as a deferred candidate, some of this might be happening in college. For those of you who might be working and in the professional world, some of that leadership might have been on a project. It might have been at an organization team level. Leadership can also be demonstrated on an individual or one-on-one level. So think very broadly about this. And it's not just what you've done, but how have you done it? Okay? What are some of those skill sets that you've applied? What are some of those aha moments, or how did you drive results? Those are those pieces that are just as important to us in this process as the accomplishments. Part of the application is to understand, from past behavior, how is this individual, what are some of the ways that they might behave again in the future? This is a great indicator. So unpacking and disassembling the process behind the output is going to be a very important tool for you throughout this process. And I think something that is going to be incredibly useful as you're learning and going through this kind of leadership development journey throughout business school and beyond, right? What is that internal dialogue that you can have here? So, personal qualities and contributions. Who are you? What are the things from your lived experience that you're going to be able to contribute? What are some of those perspectives that you're going to be bringing to the GSB, both in the classroom and community? Diversity, broadly defined, falls under this because different lived experiences will come in with different thoughts and ideas about things. At the GSB, one of our priorities, how do we create and cultivate spaces where these differences of opinions are encouraged and supported so that they come up so that we can have these learnings. I know this is something that is important as we continue to move into the future, where some of our problems, so many of our problems, are going to require folks coming together from across so many different ranges of viewpoints, backgrounds, different priority sets. How do we have constructive conversation to figure out a possible path forward? What is your perspective? How do you bring it to the table? How are we using that as an opportunity for the growth of those around you? Who are you? So with each one of those, go ahead and take a moment, jump on your list. We're going to bring that list back up, build those connections. I did some of that right here. I used 3 different colors just to make some of the lines easier. So intellectual vitality, there's also this element of biology that fascinates me. What are some of the geographic distributions of native plants and how have those evolved over time as human geography has brought, crops and crops with them to different parts of the world? And then how have those ingredients been used in like those recipes and what does that mean for culture there? I find all of that stuff fascinating. I love the application process. I think about it a lot more than I probably should. And it's something that at a leadership level, I appreciate the opportunity to help my team learn, grow, and how can we facilitate conversations about things like bias, about diversity, about lived experience, and how does that factor into the application and review process? So leadership kind of both on that practical, tactical way, and also in that thought leadership within our department. And then personal qualities and contributions, a lot of different ways this can go here, but in terms of caring about inclusion and belonging, it's really important for me that my teammates feel like they can show up, come as they are, and how can we unlock our greatest potential and effectiveness by understanding and recognize and really seeing each other. And that's kind of one of those things I bring to the table for my team. So if you are watching, go ahead and pause right now, draw some of these lines, take a moment because sometimes the lines aren't always as clearly defined as you think. You might find some very interesting pieces here. So I talked a little bit about that inclusion element, but you'll see like not everything here is super clearly defined. Like, I don't know where baldness comes into play for intellectual vitality, demonstrated leadership potential, or personal qualities right from the get-go. But I thought it was important enough to include as one of my 3 words. So take some time to unpack that, right? As I think about, okay, what does this mean? Oftentimes the way the world perceives you impacts the way that you are treated. Over time, that results in me understanding like I do need to moderate and modulate how I show up depending on where I am. Maybe it's clothes. Maybe it's the words I use. Maybe it's the body language. So how do I think about all of these different dialects of code switching in a way that helps make sure that this and this doesn't, overly impact or bias the way folks treat me, right? That's something I realize that I do on a subconscious level. And that comes from, this. So even for things that might seem facetious, even for things that might seem surface level or really obvious, I encourage you to take a step back and understand and really draw some of those connections for yourself. Again, I'm talking a lot about this internal dialogue about how do you show up in a space. Sometimes that's metaphorical, sometimes it's actual. And through the MBA application process and through the GSB application process, particularly, we invite you to go on that kind of personal kind of development and reflection journey. So already getting to some of that with understanding your list, who you are, and how do these elements of our evaluation criteria come to life for you? These are going to be different for everybody out there. You are the only person who really knows that for you, that baldness comes across as intellectual vitality and not demonstrated leadership potential, or vice versa. Maybe you are part of an organization for men or women or those who identify other as something other than man or woman, um, to talk about baldness, right? So there's different ways that you can lead or have intellectual vitality or demonstrate some of these personal qualities that only you can define. So where do we find these things? In our application, there are going to be 8 different sections. Over the course of this week, we are going to unpack a lot of these. So tomorrow we have a panel with some of my colleagues about testing transcripts and academics. There's a session on letters of reference. One coming up towards the end of the week, connecting the dots, I'm really excited by, because that is where we're going to go really deeply in how do these different parts of the application work in concert with each other? How can you think about them at the tactical, practical level in a way that will help you understand, okay, oh, maybe this is a spot where I can talk about this piece of myself, or I didn't realize that was important to include here. Today, high level, setting those foundations. Each one of our events this week will dive in with much more detail. Educational history, including your transcripts, what schools you have gone to, kind of what are some of those learnings and things you've done on that journey to where you are today. Test scores, just one part of the broader picture here. Personal activities and awards, kind of who are you, kind of at that personal information level. Professional experience, this includes your resume. This works in concert with that employment history section of the application, and we'll talk a lot about that relationship in our Connecting the Dots session later this week. Letters of reference has been a really hot topic in our information sessions as a question that comes up in the Q&A. So we really wanted to give it the time and space for us to go there and talk about how both you can set yourself up for success as an applicant, and if you're watching as a recommender or if you're working with a recommender, what are some things they can do as well to help you shine in this process? The essays and optional short response questions, these are opportunities to talk about, in your voice, what are the things that are important to you? And this is one of those places where, as you start to unpack and really understand, here's that list of 10 things about myself or more. Here's why it's meaningful for me. Here are some of those connections. That's where you start to really step out of, whatever boxes might be checked, to really add that fullness and dimension and uniqueness to who you are and what you bring to the table. And then there is an interview as part of our application process. Each one of our admitted students will go through an interview. These are behavioral based, mostly done by our alumni. And we'll talk a lot about interviews. How do you share your story, both starting it in the written form and verbally, as in an interview, in our Sharing the Story series through this week. So, but getting beyond just sections, how do they work together to help us understand you? So coming back to that definition of holistic, just as a reminder, we are looking at each one of these sections to understand and get a different window and angle to who you are, right? We're trying to build the fullest picture as possible. Notice that there's gaps in this image. There are pieces that, we may never know fully. To get that best picture, how do we close some of these gaps? How do we make sure that the details that you're including in each one of these little segments provides the most vivid picture possible? So we understand that, oh yeah, so this is your shoulder and not, a blob or a chair, but we're really starting to see, okay, this is the piece that fits in with the whole, so that we can go through that assessment, kind of giving you that full diligence and justice to who you are. Okay. Bringing back that list, you thought we were done with it. we're going to do one more thing with it before we go to Q&A. So thinking about those three things: intellectual vitality, demonstrated leadership potential, personal qualities and contribution. We are going to draw lines through your list one more time, but we're going to take it a step further. So tell me about a time when. So I talked a little bit about diversity and inclusion. So what this could look like is, this is where you get into that show, don't tell kind of frame of mind. I care about something. Or for many of you who were talking about passion, how does that show up for you, right? How can we give these pieces some meat on the bones so that when we're going into the application, there's evidence? This is an evidence-driven process. So while there is no formula, there are no cutoffs, there is no kind of preconceived notion of who our admitted students are. And it's an evidence-based process. So as we're trying to build that like compelling argument for why you should be joining our class, it's those evidence pieces that are going to be the most helpful. So drawing the lines between, hey, here are some descriptors, some high-level things about who I am. Here's the evidence for that. Here's that quote unquote proof. And so one of the ways that I care about inclusion, belonging, and that it showed up as kind of something that I did in my life, it was an action that I've taken to move something forward, is that in this past year, as the United States really grappled with who we are as a nation, also thinking about interracial kind of dynamics and systems that allow some communities to thrive while forces others to struggle, like beyond what could or should be happening. The university, Stanford University, hosted a series of events called Brave Spaces. I was a facilitator for these conversations, intentional spaces for us to talk about race, difference, justice. What does that mean? How have we experienced it as individuals? And how can we bring this conversation kind of to the forefront of what we do, such that the university can be a more inclusive space where we can really like work and operate to our fullest potential? And so do this exercise. Come up with these lists of things about who you are. And sometimes, you might have a stroke of inspiration somewhere. Bring that in. If you're thinking, hey, is this important for the application? Let's take a look at the criteria that Stanford uses. How might this connect? What's an example for how this came out in the real world? And then that could be one way that you start to identify, okay, here are some things that I really want to make sure come out in my application. Here are some of those landmarks that I want to provide so that while I'm navigating this as an applicant, whoever is reading this can also navigate the course and journey of my life in a way that they are seeing the things that have really shaped who I am and how I'm going to show up. So, tips. We are getting close. I want to make sure we get through these tips and so that I can jump into that Q&A box. If you have questions, go ahead and add them here. We also have an upvoting feature. So go ahead, if there is a question that you find really resonates for you, click that thumbs up button. It's going to help elevate that question to the top. I'm going to do my best to answer as many questions as I can with our final 10 minutes together. For some of them, I might be referring you to some other events throughout this week. And others, I'm really going to try and unpack at some of this philosophical and background understanding level to help provide that understanding and process-based approach as opposed to just the output. One of my colleagues talked about this and talked about how are we coaching you to self-coach through this process? How can we give you the tools, knowledge, and toolkits so that you can be your best self-advocate through this journey? So let's get to those tips. We're going to do a little bit more unpacking and then get to the Q&A. So first, own your journey. No two people came to the GSB following the same trajectory. Everybody does things a little bit differently. Know yours. Celebrate yours. You'd be surprised at how often the things that you do every day, probably without even thinking about it, are some of the most fascinating things to us on the admissions side. Right? The things like, how do you operate within a team? Maybe it's the way that you interact with the people around you. you don't often think twice about it. It doesn't always come up with an award or an achievement or something that like defines it, but that is a those are still ways to lead, right? So really take that step back, kind of release whatever notions you might have had about what quote unquote leadership looks like. Release whatever ideas you have about what admissions wants to hear and take control of your story. This is me. This is what I want to tell the MBA admissions office about myself. As you take control of this journey, like no one can tell you how or what you should be saying, right? People can give input, folks can provide some coaching, but ultimately you are the expert in you. So let that come to the forefront and really anchor on the things that matter to you. One of the things that I often see, um, which is often a missed opportunity, I would say, is it can be really tempting to look at different models. Here's the thing that got me in, or this is what you're supposed to do XYZ to get into Stanford. Because each one of you is different, because each one of you brings a different lived experience and skill set of competencies for leadership, action, whatever lenses you bring, that might have worked for someone. And if you try to mold yourself to that, sometimes the things that make you the most effective or the elements about you that can really be the most impactful in a business school application or journey, you might lose those because you're trying to be someone else. We're celebrating you. Your classmates are going to be learning from you. So own this journey. Find value in the process and not just the outcome. And we're going to go a little bit meta here. I mean this both in terms of the outcome of the application process. Yes, admission would be great. And the reality is that is not going to be the outcome for everyone. That said, this process, going through the exercise of understanding what matters to you, right? These are things that can help guide you as you come to different decision points in your life. Maybe you have two jobs that you might be considering. How do you choose which one? Maybe it's by going with what matters to you. Maybe there's an ethical dilemma that you're facing. Let's go back to these core mission pieces and values that you hold to help guide you through some of these kind of points in life. So even beyond the application outcome, there is still value behind going through it and really taking the moment to process and allow yourself to go there. Think about this beyond just the pure functionality of getting in, but rather maybe even think about it as a coaching exercise that you are guiding yourself through. As for the things in your application, you can also think about this as not just the outcome, but how did you do it? Coming back to that DLP, demonstrated leadership potential, what did you do and how? What was the setting around it? Who else was involved? What happened next? Tell me more. That is one of my favorite questions, kind of talking to folks that tell me more. And so I really encourage you to take a moment to reflect. Oh, remember, reflect, process, connect. So remember the things that happened, things that you're proud of. Reflect on the situation around it. I mentioned some instances that could, or some elements that could be handy, but also reflect on how you were feeling in those moments. What were you challenged by? What were you energized by? Process, take a moment and think about how these things connect to each other. In all actuality, I probably should have ordered it as remember, reflect, connect, process. But I have to, I admit, and in full disclosure here, remember, reflect, process, connect is so much easier to remember. But we could say those process and connect pieces go together. Connect the dots, right? Because of this, that happened. I was inspired by XYZ. See how these elements connect to who you are today. I learned this, I applied it there. And that process piece, take time to process how all of these different dots connect. There might be dots that you never realized existed. Maybe it's through that exercise we did today. Maybe you didn't know that you really did engage with baldness at an intellectual level. Give yourself time to unpack, celebrate, and explore through this. And remember, through all of it, it all begins with you. Okay, so that is what I have prepared right now. So I'm going to jump into our Q&A box. Before we do that, I really want to encourage everybody here to continue your journey at mystanford.mba. With some short questions, we're able to create a dashboard that will help consolidate some of the events that may be of most interest to you. There is also an application tracker to help keep you kind of up to date on where you are and get you going to that finish line. I really encourage you, if you aren't sure whether or not you should apply now or in the future, take a moment and think, what is it that you want to do? How can Stanford get you there? If you are thinking we can, I encourage you, go ahead, do this process. Take these moments to really celebrate your journey, um, because tomorrow can be a very beautiful thing. And I want to make sure that you give yourself every opportunity to realize that. Okay. So let me go ahead. We are going to jump into that Q&A box. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. And here we go. So here's a question from Anna. A number of you have also kind of bumped this question up. So Anna imagines that the GSB, like other business schools, tries to admit a diverse class. How does that affect how they try to balance students from different countries, industries, etc.? So great question here. I think ultimately, the one number that we're trying to target is bringing in a class. So for us, that is 420-ish year to year. And even that, it flexes depending on the circumstances, right? But rather than focusing on that number, or is there some breakdown that we're going towards, we're really looking at you as an individual. One of the kind of amazing things and things that I really appreciate about the holistic review process is that we think about not just, we don't think about you as someone from X place, but how does being from X place shape the perspective that you bring? And I think if you allow yourself to take a step and look at it from that perspective, you're going to have a lot more agency in demonstrating to us like that perspective that can bring kind of that enhanced dialogue to the classroom or spark conversations in the community. This might sound like a little bit of a tangent of an answer, but something that we talk about, something that Dean Moss has talked to me about, and we've had conversations about this, is like staying on your side of the net. What does that mean, right? If you think about a game like tennis or volleyball, you are in control of what's happening on your side of the net. What's happening and what the other person decides to do, that's up to them. So as we think about this application process, my goal with this week is to bring more light and visibility to what are the pieces on your side of the net so that you can understand, okay, here are the steps I can take left, right, around. And so, not that I'm trying to give a non-answer answer, but at a practical sense, there's actually a whole field called enrollment management where this is part of the consideration. How are we bringing in as diverse cohort as possible? I think one of the lucky things for us is that we do get a really broad representation of extremely talented individuals from around the world. That said, sometimes I do get the question, why are so many people from the United States? Or why are they so many people from consulting? Is that going to be a disadvantage for me? Part of this is that those tend to be some of our largest pipelines. We can only admit the people who apply. And so that is that other part of encouraging you to take a step. And if this is something that you're thinking about, don't count yourself out because you don't immediately identify with what it looks like on our class profile, right? So couple different layers to that answer. We really do care about the individual and the talents that you bring. We will never admit someone just because of one thing, right? And so regardless of where you come from, like hopefully you're able to share all of these pieces with us to build that case for saying this is a compelling individual. So thank you for that question, Anna. From Deshant, um, talking about varied themes that are within the bounds of including in the application, can we touch upon what applicants should avoid creating their application? This might be useful for internationals who might not be very familiar with the US admissions process and expectations. Thank you, Deshant, for this question. This is at the heart of what we are trying to do. I would say there is very little that is off limits for the application. So there might be a topic that might feel controversial. There might be a event in your life that might not seem immediately business related, but it really is important to how you view yourself. When it comes to the GSB application, and I can't speak to all applications out there, but when it comes to the GSB application, think about it as what you're writing about is almost less important than the so what of it. What are you trying to convey about yourself? Or who are you because of X, Y, or Z things that you're trying to write about? Okay. And so, as long as that topic is in good taste, and here's maybe one guideline that you might take home with you is if you step back and let's talk about the essays for a second. If by the end of that essay, I know more about that topic than I do about you or how you engage with the topic, how that shapes your perspective, what you've done with it. If I know more about that topic than you, some element of you, that might be the moment to step back and do a little bit of assessment and shift kind of your angle on that. So ultimately, very little is off off the rails here with this process, which is both empowering and a little bit intimidating. Not everything has to deal with business. Again, thinking about how the individual kind of what you bring to the table is so much more than kind of the class that you might be taking. You are so much more than like a test score or transcript. Like how can we recognize and celebrate that? So through this week as well. So that was a very high level answer. Through this week, we're actually going to dig into all of these elements very specifically. And I'm really looking forward to our panels because I'm excited for the conversations to come. Okay. All right, question here, and this is more tactical, practical. When does it matter? Like round one, round two, no major difference here. And we'll also be talking about some of that tactical, practical with the connecting the dots. I have time for one more question. We're going to stick to this philosophical. How do we understand the process to set up and tee up the different events we have this week? And here's one from Cecilia. Is there an ideal balance or ratio of these aspects? So I'm assuming intellectual vitality, demonstrated leadership potential, personal qualities and contributions. Would having too much or not enough in one area be particularly detrimental to an application? And I can say wholeheartedly, the answer is no. You don't have to have everything, right? Each one of you, think about the leaders and people in your life that you look up to or find really effective. Everyone uses a different balance, and that's awesome. As you're thinking about your balance, right? That's where we're starting to unpack. Okay, so in this list of things, what do you do? How do you do them? Okay, here's the balance that I bring and fully recognize and celebrate that. Other areas, like not every leader, and Dean Moss, her research background is actually in like leadership assessment. So if you're curious to learn more and want to learn more, join us this Friday for Office Hours with Dean Moss. And she talks about those many different types of leadership competencies. Not every leader will express all of them. And same in this application process, not everybody needs to express everything. Some people are very spiky and really like excel in certain areas, and that's awesome. Other folks are a little bit more balanced and do varied things, and that's awesome as well. So regardless of your journey, like there is no preset kind of balance that we're looking for. Again, there's no formula, no equation to our process. We're really looking at you kind of in the fullness of you. So thank you again for joining us. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. This is just the beginning of our conversation. We set the groundwork and started an exercise that you can do to start creating these stories and understandings of who you are so that over the course of the week, we can continue to process, unpack, and answer questions, as many as you have. In the meanwhile, feel free to message our email inbox. We have a team of folks who are there to support. Thank you so much for joining me this very first event in Application Week, navigating the application, this crash course into the holistic review process. I hope to see you across the events of this week and answer as many questions and really empower you to take that step forward. Remember, it all begins with you. Thank you again, y'all.